The film begins with Annie, who is in the middle of a forest. She is completely battered, with her face and body covered entirely in mud. We will soon find out why. At this moment, Annie looks at the food she has and finds it's a very small amount, which upsets her because she will soon have to venture out to find more food. Annie then goes to a nearby stream to wash the mud off her face. But who is Annie, my friend, and what brought her to the middle of the forest? What is even happening in this world? To understand, we must go back to the past slightly. We see Annie with her husband Jason and their daughter. At this time, Jason is in a great hurry and anxious about the virus currently spreading through the city. Consequently, he gathers all his clothes and asks Annie to quickly pack all her clothes and any important belongings so they can go to the forest, as the forest is the least likely place for the virus to be spread. He reassures her that everything will be fine. Annie calms down and begins packing all her belongings. In total, they all get into the car to head to the forest, and Jason turns on the car radio. We then hear the radio host stating the health ministry declared a virus surfaced here that severely infects people, altering them into zombie-like beings. We also learn the symptoms are abdominal skin rash, nausea, and intense aggression. The key point is the virus spreads via air, breathing, and blood. This is why the outbreak is spreading so unnaturally fast. And that's all the news we have. We cut back to Jason and Annie, who have now reached the forest. Jason is holding a rifle and instructs Annie on setting animal traps to secure meat supplies for them to eat. Naturally, Annie understands nothing of what Jason is saying. So, she gets out paper and a pen and writes down everything he says piece by piece, so she won't forget. Jason then gives her the rifle, places a box of biscuits in front of her, tells her to pretend it's a zombie, and asks her to shoot it to learn to aim correctly. Annie attempts this, but her aim is poor. Jason stresses that she must hit the head or heart of any approaching zombie. To do this, she needs to calm down and focus. Later that day at night, they start a fire and sit by it. Annie tells Jason they need food and cannot rely solely on the berries in the forest. Without hesitation, Jason takes the rifle to search for food in the nearby village. Generally, after a few hours, Jason returned, but he was injured, terrified, and moreover urgent. He immediately told Annie and their daughter to get in the car fast so they could leave the spot at once. Annie quickly obeyed. They all got into the vehicle. After a short drive, when Jason had calmed down, he told Annie he had managed to reach a nearby village, but all its residents were dead and it was full of zombies. The zombies attacked him, but Jason somehow managed to escape. He rushed back to Annie and his daughter so they could flee before those zombies reached them. As Jason recounted this, he was deeply saddened, while Annie was simultaneously sad and shocked. Anyway, after driving for a while, they reach a different part of the forest to set up camp. At that point, Annie informed Jason that their daughter had a fever and needed medicine. Jason immediately became anxious for his daughter. Without thinking, he stood up to go search for medicine and food, but before he left, he asked Annie to put mud on his body and face to mask his scent from the zombies, ensuring he wouldn't repeat the mistake he made when the zombies attacked him in the village. After she did this, he said goodbye to his wife and left. The key point is that shortly after Jason left, Annie started hearing the sound of zombies screaming and gunshots. Fearing for Jason, she decided to take her daughter and go find him, as hours had passed and he hadn't returned. When she and her daughter went looking for Jason, she managed to find him. But tragically, he was dead, brutally killed by the zombies that attacked him. Annie was deeply shocked when she saw him and, of course, terribly grieved. What made her sorrow worse was finding food in Jason's bag that he had brought back for them. Not only that, Jason was clutching the medicine for their daughter in his hand. Annie then quickly tried to control her sorrow so she could survive and protect the only daughter she had left. Consequently, she took the rifle from beside Jason and returned with her daughter to their campsite. In total, when Annie and her daughter returned, they slept inside the car so that the vehicle would shield them from the cold and the zombies. Days passed, and Annie faced a huge problem. The food Jason brought before he died had run out. At that point, she had no choice but to cover her entire body with mud and go search for food herself. Before leaving, she said goodbye to her daughter, put her inside the car, locked it, and even placed branches over the car. She was terrified zombies might attack her daughter at any moment while she was gone. After walking for a while, Annie reached a secluded house in the middle of the forest. Suddenly, Annie saw a zombie eating meat that was in the refrigerator. Annie, without thinking, killed the zombie. The crucial detail here is that the zombie's blood soaked Annie's clothes, but Annie didn't care. She quickly gathered all the food from the refrigerator and rushed back to her daughter, who was crying intensely. Annie tried to soothe her and began hugging her. The shock, my friend, is that while she hugged her daughter, the zombie's blood that was on her clothes got into the girl's mouth. Annie was frantic then, knowing her daughter might now be infected with the virus. But sadly, she couldn't do anything but wait and see. The next day, while changing her daughter, Annie noticed a skin rash on the girl's abdomen. She immediately grasped that her daughter was infected with the virus and would die. She couldn't control her anguish. Knowing her daughter suffered terribly from the virus's pain, Annie had only one choice: to end her child's suffering. She dissolved all the medicine she possessed and put it into her daughter's milk to kill her rather than allow her continued torment. Annie was, needless to say, consumed by grief but felt she had no choice. So after all that sadness, we now know Annie's solo situation in the forest. We now jump to the present. Remember, that was the past. We currently see Annie trying to survive alone following the deaths of her husband and daughter. Annie starts walking through the woods, searching for anything to eat since she has no food. She consults the notes Jason had given her previously so she could construct traps. She successfully built a trap deep in the forest and then returned to the car to sleep. The following morning, Annie woke up and instantly went to check the trap, but she found absolutely no animal caught in it. She was extremely disappointed and returned to the campsite. While there, she sterilizes her knife using fire, but accidentally cuts herself. She endures the pain momentarily, but then collects all the blood that spilled from her wound into a container. We will learn the purpose later. At this point, Annie covers her entire body with mud, prepares her rifle, and heads out to search for food anew. After a short walk, she reaches a large iron fence. There she hangs her daughter's toy on the fence and smears all the blood from the container onto it. Her goal is to draw all nearby zombies to the toy by having them smell the blood. This strategy works instantly. Annie then quickly slips through a gap in the fence. She soon spots a house, enters it, and begins searching for any food. Thankfully, she manages to find a good supply of food. She gathers all the food she can carry in her bag and exits. Up until this moment, everything was fine. What wasn't fine was that as Annie exited, all the zombies spotted her and immediately chased her. She panicked and started running. Unfortunately, while scrambling through the fence gap, she sustains a painful cut on her side, but thankfully she manages to escape. She rushes back to the camp and begins stitching the wound on her side. And that's how the day ends, my friend. Days pass. One day, Annie sees a young girl accompanied by an injured man. Annie immediately worries that the man might be infected with the virus. So she approaches the girl and asks her to show his abdomen so she can check for symptoms. The girl shows her his abdomen, which is clean. Annie realizes he is not infected, feels reassured, and proceeds to help the injured man. During this time, the girl informed her that her name was Liv, and the injured man with her was Chris, her stepfather. They were also heading north to the refuge where all the people were. Liv sadly told her that her mother was infected with the virus and attacked them, but Chris killed her and they escaped. A side note: Liv, my friend, has psychological issues, so we must consider that. Annie felt reassured, so she took Chris and Liv to her camp. Not only that, she stitched the wound on Chris's head and gave Liv food. Annie then left the tent for them to rest and went to sleep in the car. The next day, Annie woke up early to build traps, but Liv saw her and helped her. They also went out to the forest together to search for food and other supplies. Later, as it got dark, Annie and Liv returned to the camp and found Chris awake and waiting. Liv cried and hugged him, happy to see him after what happened. Afterward, Chris talked with Annie, thanking her for her kindness to him and Liv. He told her they would be leaving north tomorrow, as there was rumored to be a refuge, the last known human settlement. He then went to sleep in the tent with Liv, while Annie slept in the car. Hours later, the weather changed. It started raining. Chris and Liv apologized and moved to the car with her to sleep, seeking shelter from the rain. At that point, Chris asked what she was doing out here alone. She explained that due to the virus, her husband feared infection and brought her and their daughter to the forest to avoid people. But later, her husband and daughter became infected and died. Chris then told Annie that Liv's mother had also been infected. They had hoped the Red Cross would treat her, but they didn't, and the virus worsened until she turned into a zombie. She attacked her daughter Liv and was about to kill her, but Chris killed the mother and saved Liv. After they finished telling their respective stories, the rain stopped. Chris and Liv returned to the tent to sleep, while Annie grabbed the rifle and went out again to find food. Hours later, Chris and Liv woke up. Liv was restless and asked Chris when they were heading north. He told her, "Not now. We will stay with Annie for a while because she has water and food, and we must thank her for everything she did for us. She suffered alone for a long time, unlike us. You and I were together even after your mother died." Liv did not like this at all. She wanted to go to the safe place in the north. After a while, Annie returned with a lot of food. She sat with Chris and Liv and shared the food with them. During this time, she noticed Chris pocketing some of the food. Annie felt sad, realizing they were preparing to leave soon. She spoke to Chris sadly, offering him more food, but he refused. Instead, he offered her the chance to go north with him and Liv. Annie refused, saying she would stay in the forest as she had no motivation left after the death of her daughter and husband, so she didn't want to go anywhere. When Chris heard this, he felt very sorry for Annie. He decided to try and make her feel safe. That night, when they were all together, Chris started feeding Annie himself, and they even laughed and joked together, trying to forget they were living through an apocalypse. Liv, however, was annoyed with Annie, feeling Annie was stealing Chris from her. The very next day, Liv didn't waste time. She sat with Chris to understand why he was treating Annie this way and why he wanted her to join them. Chris replied, "If it weren't for Annie, I would be dead and you would be alone. Besides, I just want her to come with us so she can take care of us and we can take care of her." My friend Liv was upset when she heard this, but she soon returned to the tent to wait for Chris, as Chris and Annie were currently collecting firewood for the night's fire. It is here, my friend, that we notice Chris and Annie are genuinely starting to fall in love. They began talking and completely forgot they were delaying Liv. Liv became anxious for Chris, so without thinking, she went out to look for him. The critical moment arrives when Annie and Chris return to the camp and are shocked and terrified to find Liv gone. They immediately rush out to search for her. At the same time, Liv encounters a zombie and tries to run but fails. The zombie tries to eat her, but Chris manages to reach them just in time and saves Liv. The problem is that the zombie was incredibly strong and attacked Chris as well. Annie helped him, and Chris fought the zombies furiously. After all this, Chris became extremely concerned about Annie's camp. The fact that zombies reached the camp meant that the rest could arrive at any moment in large packs. He urgently asked Annie to come with them, but she refused. This refusal made Chris angry, and he shouted at her, "You will die here. Are you punishing yourself because you lost your family? Your family is gone. You are all that is left. Please think." Chris then calmed down and returned to the camp to prepare to leave with Liv in the morning. Annie, my friend, finally started thinking about Chris's words and was convinced. She returned to the camp and told Chris she would go with them, but they had to gather food first. Chris was overjoyed, unlike Liv, who was slightly annoyed. They then began covering Liv's body and her own body with mud so they could go get food. When they finished, they all went to the fence. At this point, Annie and Liv separated from Chris. Chris's mission was to draw the zombies' attention, buying Annie and Liv time to collect food. Chris deliberately cut himself and smeared his body with blood until the zombies smelled his scent and quickly rushed toward him, chasing him. At that moment, Annie and Liv heard the zombies screaming and realized they had gone after Chris. They quickly entered the house, and Annie immediately began gathering food. Liv, however, grabbed a sharp object and threw it at Annie, knocking her unconscious. Liv then tied her up and screamed to draw all the zombies to Annie, then fled. The zombies did start gathering near Annie, but Annie managed to free herself somehow. She poured vinegar on her body to mask her scent from the zombies. She quickly hid in the freezer until the zombies dispersed. She then rushed out to return to the camp. Meanwhile, Liv had returned to the camp, but due to her foolishness, she didn't realize the zombies were following her. Now all the zombies storm the camp and attack Chris. He tries to fight them off with a piece of metal he had with him and kills many of them. But during this fight, Annie also reached the camp. She saw Chris being attacked by a zombie, and she saw another zombie attacking Liv. Annie was in a terrible position because she only had one bullet and had to choose who to save. After careful thought, she realized Chris had a better chance of survival because he had a knife on his side, so she was forced to save Liv. She did so, but unfortunately, Chris reached the knife too late. The zombie bit him until he died. Annie then quickly got into the car with Liv, who was now completely insane, my friend, and had also lost the ability to speak after everything that happened. Annie herself was distraught and screaming loudly. Of course, they are now heading north, but there is no real guarantee that a refuge for humans truly exists, or that they aren't the last people left. And that's all. Goodbye.